I love so many things about North Dakota, and one of the things I love the best is how anxious we are to help one another. You see it all the time. You've seen the traffic jams at entryways when you're trying to go into a restaurant or a building as people stop to hold the doors open for one another. If you've ever stopped alongside one of our roads to take a picture or a phone call or to change a tire, you've probably had multiple people stop just to make sure you don't need any help. Another way North Dakotans can show kindness to their neighbors is by getting vaccinated. Vaccinations keep vulnerable people safe from severe illness and death. They keep our economy running by keeping our businesses open. They help us stay mentally healthy by allowing us to connect with others through church events or community groups. They also keep our healthcare workers safe and on the job. Getting vaccinated is a choice you can make to help your neighbors, your community, and your state. So talk to your doctor about it and follow their advice to get the vaccinations that will help keep you and all the people you care about healthy and happy. To learn more, go to spreadlovenotcovidnd.org, a website set up by the North Dakota State University Center for Immunization Research and Education.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and of course, as you know, if you're listening to this podcast, you certainly know that our legislature is in session in Bismarck, and there's a lot of ideas that are coming to the forefront, as well there should be, right? That's what a legislature is all about, is people bringing lots of different ideas and competing priorities and competing philosophies, and we hash it all out, and we try to make law and budget decisions that we can all hopefully live with. Later on in the show, we're actually going to be talking with State Representative Greg Stemen. He's a Republican from Fargo, and he has an idea to legalize sports betting. I shouldn't say, I don't know what online. Sports betting, basically, which I think, as we all know, if you've watched a sporting event recently, is a lot of that's happening online. A lot of North Dakotans, I suspect, are already doing it. We're going to talk about his proposal a little bit later in the show. We're also going to talk with him a little bit. There was some controversy about his employment at Sanford. He got appointed to be on the board of trustees for PERS, the Public Employee Retirement System, which also handles the health insurance contracts. And one of the companies that currently holds the health insurance contract is Sanford Health, who is also Mr. Simmons' employer. So we'll talk with him about all that. That's coming up later in the show. What we're going to start with my co-host, former State Representative Ben Hansen, we're going to start with a proposal from Representative Matt Ruby. He's a Republican hailing from just the most wonderful city in the entire state of North Dakota, the city of Minot, which is also, of course, my home. Representative Ruby has a bill. It was announced yesterday. It has created, I think, consternation is the right word, from certain interests in the state. Essentially, the bill, and Representative Ruby can explain it in more depth if I fumble this, but the broad strokes are it would cap the number of, maybe cap's the wrong word. It would require that no school superintendent could represent a school district for 425 students, right? Is that right? I mean, basically, it's there can only be one superintendent for every 425 students. So we have school districts in our state that have sometimes far less than that, and yet they still have a superintendent. This proposal would say, hey, if you've got a small district, we need to do some administrative consolidating. You need to hire a superintendent or have a superintendent maybe share them with other area districts. And then the other part of it is it would also cap the amount of money that superintendents could be paid. Representative Ruby, did I get all that right?
Yeah, essentially. What we would intend with this bill is that school districts that have that under that 475 students would come together, and they would hire one superintendent to represent themselves. And then the other part of the bill would have a cap of total state funding and total local funding. And it'd be 1.5% of that. So if there's 5 districts that you pool all of their state and local funding, and 1.5% of that would be the max that you can pay a superintendent.
Representative Ruby, let's talk about the problem that you're reporting that you're trying to address with this bill. Can you tell us what is the current status? For those of us that don't work in education, and I am one of them, I don't really know how many people a superintendent is intended on having under them, if there is a number of students or teachers or population centers. Where was the problem you're seeing here that motivated you to bring forward this bill?
So honestly, it started with the more and more I heard about superintendents that are making six figures and teachers are kind of scraping by. And so I had a frustration with that, but I didn't have the numbers to back it up. I didn't know what the numbers were, and I reached out to DPI to get superintendents, or for each of the school districts, the student population and how much the compensation package was for the superintendents. And honestly, it opened my eyes. So there's plenty of them there that are, under 100 students that are making the, there's one that's at, 222, 126, 129, 168. And it just keeps going up. 195. It's really, really high numbers. I understand that there's some situations where they have, the superintendent is also the principal, but, they're not doing the same. They're not being a superintendent 5 days a week, and they're not being or 7 days a week, and they're not being a principal 7 days a week. So they're getting this huge benefit package, and I think it should equate a little bit more to how much time they're spending doing that specific job.
Two things about what you just said. Who's setting those current salaries? And when you say that there's combination principal and superintendents, I assume those are in the more rural, sparsely populated areas. They're only getting one salary, correct?
So the compensation packages are set by the school districts. One of the issues is that the state requires them to have a superintendent. So if they wait till later, and if people that want to apply for the superintendent opening, if they wait later in the hiring process, they can really come in with all sorts of demands. There's not a huge supply of superintendents, but there's a huge demand for them, because of this requirement that every school district has one. So it is set by the school district, which would still remain with this. They would just have to share. And then what was your other question?
When you said that there were combination principal superintendents, do they only receive one salary, or do they receive two compensation packages for both jobs?
I think it varies. Again, it's based on what was negotiated in that school district. So there are certain situations where they do get double salary. There's some, I know of one that's a little northwest of me that makes a pretty reasonable salary for those two jobs. But he is that particular superintendent is a superintendent. The principal drives the bus and is the administrative or the athletic director.
Yeah.
So,
and the reason I asked that was because in my mind, I would think that if they're doing a dual role, they're maybe not having to fill in both positions. If they were paying a singular salary, that in theory is technically saving you on paper that either principal or superintendent salary, or it's reducing because it's one FTE versus two FTEs. And I'm wondering if local school districts consider that a factor.
So I would say that you could, even based on a lot of what's in place now, you could elevate a teacher to fill some of that principal role, and still have that person, that superintendent, focus on the superintendent role and take on more school districts, and there'd still be a savings.
Representative Ruby, one thing that I wondered was, because you mentioned that school districts are required to have a superintendent now. Are they allowed, under current law, would they be allowed to share a superintendent? Like, could a couple of school districts, if they wanted to now, voluntarily say, hey, we're gonna give you a contract, understanding that you're also gonna have a contract with this other school district, and we're gonna share you? Is that possible now?
Yep. And it does happen. I'm not saying that there's nobody that's sharing right now. Actually, I know of a few situations. I know of one that gets two superintendent salaries. And that he's not in either school district 100% of the time. He's got to split his time. And so I thought that was outrageous, but that's what he negotiated. So fine. There is actually a provision. I think it was Representative Sanford put it in 2019, I believe, that if a school district shares a superintendent and business manager, they can be reimbursed up to 25% of those salaries, and nobody took advantage of that. The state would reimburse that. Nobody took advantage of that. So it's not like we're coming in out of left field with this. This is something that we've been discussing for a while. There's a lot of frustrations with it. It's kind of a sacred cow. A lot of people don't want to come in heavy-handed from the state, but we have 75% to 80%, depending on the school district, of their budgets comes from the state. And there's a proposal in the Senate that would bring that up to 90. But if we do that, there's no added oversight on how it's spent.
You know, one of the statistics that I thought was really interesting when you came out was, and you'll have to refresh me now, but it was the number of students who make up rural districts versus the number of the superintendent's salary. Like, can you repeat that? Because I really thought that was astonishing.
Yeah. So small. Let's see here. There's 170 school districts. 60% of all of our students are served by just 9. So the Fargos, the Minots, Bismarcks, Williston, Dickinson. I would have to go through and list them, but so the other 161 are mainly small districts with an average of 300 students, serve just 40% of our students. But out of superintendent salaries, that makes up 90% of it. So 40% of the student population is covering 90% of the superintendent.
So what's the incentive? I mean, we all know that local government officials, I mean, I can't imagine they're sitting around twirling their mustaches saying, let's spend lots of money on a superintendent and really stick it to the taxpayers. I mean, you know as well as I do how North Dakotans feel about their property taxes. Now, understanding a bulk of this is coming from the state now, but you know, I mean, what's the incentive here to give big contracts to superintendents and then not, that may be redundant? I mean, because I'm looking at this problem and I'm saying this is redundant. I mean, we have too many administrators. We have administrative bloat going on. You know, let's take a pin and pop the balloon. But I'm just wondering, what's the motivation from the local level to do this?
Well, one, they're kind of hamstring because there is a requirement that they have to have one. And in order to get somebody from one of these bigger areas, they have to pay to get them to come to some of these small schools. I would think that there would be some incentive to have such a smaller population. If you look at superintendents in the bigger schools, they have, I think it's 8 to 12 out of the big three, I've got them right here actually. So Bismarck is the biggest with 13,000. West Fargo's got 12,000. Fargo's got 11. Minot's got 7.5, and it kind of goes. It's all in that same in general, but so they could have a lot less students under them, a lot less administration, but their compensation packages aren't that much different than the smaller schools. So they have to pay. The smaller schools have to pay in order to get somebody.
Representative Ruby, you represent Minot, and as you just referenced, one of the larger school districts, not the largest. I was wondering, have you spoken to a few or many of the rural superintendents who this would directly impact, or to school board members in those rural districts? And what do they have to? If so, what have they had to say about the bill, or what kind of input do they have?
I have, other than since the bill dropped, I've gotten a few calls from superintendents, and obviously they don't like it. As far as school board members, it's probably 50-50. I've gotten a lot of good discussion with them. The initial worry is that it's going to lose local control. They're not going to get a say of who they have. Well, they still do. They're going to have to collaborate with another school district. In a perfect world, they would pool their school districts, build a board out of those members or certain members from each board, and they would come together and make a decision. Again, it's not told we didn't direct how they have to do it, but so once they kind of get through that, it's been pretty. They understand the reasoning for this, and one of the interesting things is I've gotten some people. I put out a flyer in the press release or press conference that used 4 examples, and almost every call that I've gotten, they thought I made up those numbers, and they're very upset that I use those numbers, and I didn't make up the numbers, and that kind of, they're also upset about this. They're just not the ones that are really taking advantage, but they're the ones that are fired up because they will now have to take on more responsibility.
And you got those numbers from the Department of Public Instruction?
Yes.
Matt, I'm wondering if because I'm thinking, okay, so if I'm a rural district and the number of students we have enrolled is below below the threshold. So that means that kicks in this law's requirement that we're going to have to collaborate with another school district. Are there going to be geographical problems here? Because what if like I'm trying to, it's like, okay, well, I got to collaborate with another district, but this district over here is already collaborating with a district on the other side of them. You know what I mean? Like, are we going to run into problems where a district that needs to collaborate can't find anyone to collaborate? And also recognizing our state is very, very large, and you start collaborating too far out. Now you're asking a superintendent to spend a lot of time on the road. And one of the things I think that makes this possible is obviously what we're doing right now, which is the, sort of proliferation of video conferencing and tools like that are widely available, easy to use, next to free. But the reality is, I mean, the superintendent, I'm just wondering, like, if we're going to run into a situation where a school district can't collaborate with a nearby school district.
Yeah, so we did put that into the bill. So we discussed that. That was one of the first, when I started making conversations with other legislators, that was one of the things that was brought up. And we pretty much identified, and I haven't crossed the state, that's just in discussions. There's one school that always comes up that is 45 miles away from the next closest North Dakota school. And that, so I've got some personal beliefs on that, but I also have some reference. So personally, if you're sending school buses out on those roads, and the superintendent can still travel on those roads, but like you just said, the teleconference is a huge tool there. But that, I think, is the only one that we've identified so far that would be a struggle with. But if it comes time, if everybody does their not, I don't want to say consolidation, everyone comes together and decides who they're pairing with, then, and there's somebody that's left out, we gave the K through 12 board, not DPI, the K through 12 board, the ability to assess who best fits in with that. And that also eliminates a situation where, surrounding school districts don't want a certain school for whatever reason. K through 12 board could come in, and only in those instances is there going to be any state forcing of who they co-op with in that. But an interesting note is, I always, when people ask about the geographical, I always point to Wyoming. So Wyoming has 94,000 students, and they have 48 superintendents. So they have more. They have fewer. Fewer students and more surface area in their state to cover, and they still have an average of 1,958 students per superintendent. So I don't think 475 is that much to figure out as far as drive time. If that's where it really comes down to, and we have to say, if you're a satellite school with 40 miles away from someone, so be it. South Dakota's got some language about scarcity in certain districts. If we have to adopt something similar to that, I'm not opposed to it. Mainly we need to have this discussion though, and nobody's been really taking up the mantle and wanting to do this. So here's the bill.
In your research, do you know what the average is for superintendent salaries in North Dakota? And do you know it versus the average salary for teachers?
If you give me 1 second, I do have that.
Okay.
I also want to hear, while Representative Ruby looks that up, I also want to hear him, I heard him correct himself. He started to use the term consolidation, and that was the first thing I thought of is, oh boy, rural districts are going to see this as an effort to consolidate. So once you find those figures, Representative Ruby, I'd like you to address that too, because I feel like that's how a lot of people are going to perceive this. This is the state trying to impose consolidation on us, and we don't want that. So I don't know if you have those figures ready now.
Let's see here.
it's no fun.
It's average salary of a super. So I've got it based on administration. I don't have it broken down by. So this includes business managers, superintendents, and principals, assistant principals. Is about 105 to 110, and the average teacher is about, I'll say 59, 58, somewhere in there.
Okay. And your bill specifically only caps superintendent salaries, not principals and not business managers, correct?
Correct. Yeah. We're specific to leave that portion out. I think it's a discussion to be had, but we're taking baby steps. And I'm not saying I'm bringing a bill next time or anything like that. We got to have this discussion about how we are are more efficient with the funding that the state gives to these school districts.
On your promotional materials, I'll call them, or the things I watched yesterday, the video that you put together, and statements you'd made, you'd mentioned that the money saved here could be used to do things like increase teacher pay, in addition to other things that you'd mentioned, including giving back to taxpayers, and I think some, just kind of broad resource development. Are you or any of the supporters of this bill going to bring forward some kind of a bill to increase teacher pay as a hand-in-hand, I guess, bill, for lack of a better term, with this bill?
I'm not. I would. I'm fairly certain there is an increase for the pupil funding. But again, that doesn't. There's no. It's not in the state's. I guess overview or oversight ability to determine where the money goes. I think when John Hoeven was elected, that was one of the things he ran on, and they did it then. But I'm not bringing it. This certainly does free up that money, and I think that's where it should go. But in the essence of local control, I'm not telling them that's where it has to go.
It would be hard. I mean, money's fungible too. So, I mean, it would be hard to identify, was this dollar the result of us, capping or sharing a superintendent, or is this dollar from property taxes? I mean, it's especially as this kicks in 5 years from now, how do you tell the difference? I think it would be tough for the legislature to direct that. Consolidation. Let's talk about that. I feel like that's going to be a rebuttal here. The state's trying to consolidate our rural schools.
I see this as a way that we prevent consolidation. This is what I just said, is we are being more efficient with the money that goes to these small schools, without a lot of oversight from the state still. And I think what kills a small school is when the student numbers drop, and then it's harder to get to have the funding for the teachers to be paid, and teachers drop, and it's just a chicken before the egg. It just keeps dropping and dropping. And then how do you justify keeping it open and the property taxes that go along with it? So I see this as a way that school districts will have a little bit of extra funding, keep that going, and hopefully they can keep the student population up. But that still would that's on them to determine. It's not a state mandate or a state intent to consolidate. It's certainly not where I'm coming from with this. It's I'm a Class B kid myself. I love the small school setting. I was very specific. My wife is a Class A girl, and I was very specific to send my kids to Class B. But I still think we should have a little bit of oversight and efficiency in how we're spending.
Representative Ruby, I did watch a video that I believe I should ask, who put that video together? Was that you? Was that another supporter? Was that a group that put the promotional video for the bill together?
Yeah, I had a consultant put that video together based on information we got from DPI.
Well, I wanted to compliment you on the video, because when I work with groups, so I spent a whopping 4 years in the legislature. And when I talk to workaround groups, either for-profit businesses, nonprofits, usually in the Fargo Moorhead area, that's simply where I reside, there's a lot of I'm trying to think of the right word, not iron curtain, but perception of an iron curtain between the people of the state and their legislature. And I think it's a outside of Bismarck thing. Now, I've never lived in Minot, so you have a better perspective on Minot than I do. But one of the things I like to do, and I try to do, and I was really grateful for Rob asking me to come and co-host with him, is try to educate people on how their state government works in a way that's relevant to them. I thought, you've heard the old cliched phrase, the medium's the messenger. I thought that video put it together very succinctly in a way that if somebody had not been working in the education system in the state of North Dakota or known about the problem, they would have understood it much more quickly. Can you tell me, and then, I also assume, playing devil's advocate, those opposed to you might push back on and say this information is deceptive, or I disagree with this point. Can you kind of walk me through, was that I assume that was intentional on your part to try and bring it home, so to speak? I used air quotes with my fingers, which was a poor thing to do on an audio format. But talk to me about how you're doing that researching. Are you planning on doing more of that? Is there and not trying to be suspicious, is there like a group of legislators using this consultant that you're planning on putting out more education pieces? Can you speak more to that?
Yeah. I guess I haven't really given it a thought about doing more of the videos. I think it's certainly it's easier to break it down. So when I'm sure you know, when people bring bills to the floor, sometimes they get really into the weeds in it. And I try to do my best to explain it to. I'm on human services, so it helps a lot to be able to explain it to the people that aren't in that realm, and just break it down for in the layman's terms. And so I think that was the intent of that video, is to really make it as easily as understandable. We are going to use that for pushing the discussion on the floor and pushing that out to other legislators. But I guess we hadn't really thought about doing any other videos or anything like that.
Is there a place folks could go find that or see that if they want to see further information?
So we did link it into the press release. We can certainly put it on.
I embedded it in my column. They could certainly go read my column and see the video.
Yeah. And they can do that. And I saw that. I'm going to throw at you, Representative Ruby. For the average Joe Schmo that is just trying to figure out the legislature, they don't necessarily know where to go look for a press release. Hopefully they can read a column and see that online. But
yeah, I guess I don't have a website built for this bill or anything like that.
Slap a link to it up on your social media, Representative Ruby. It solves the problem right there. There you go.
Well, I don't have a representative spot, but I can certainly, maybe I'll throw one together.
Maybe I'll throw it up too. So if people want to see it. It is informative. Two questions. First of all, related to what Ben's line of inquiry, who paid for the consultant? Where did that money come from? You did.
I did.
Okay.
It came out of my campaign funds.
Okay. And then number two, who this is now a separate issue. One of the things that I also heard from, I wrote favorably. My column was favorable to your bill. I like it. I also heard from several superintendents, all but one of them I think retired, but we're not happy about this. And one of the things they said that I thought was interesting was it may be problematic to ask superintendents to serve more than one school board. And it's kind of serving more than one master. There may be conflicts between, one school board wants to do things one way, another school board wants to do things another way, or maybe one school board's putting more demands on the superintendent than another board. How do those problems get resolved?
I would say the same way that they are now with the school districts that are already sharing. You're going to have joint boards that come together and set the parameters and how much they're supposed to be in each school and stuff like that. And that's one thing that I've had a couple discussions with on. What if one school district wants to fire the other one, or fire the superintendent, the others don't? Well, they can leave that group or that collaborative school district group. It's really up to them how they want to handle that. I think in an ideal world, if I was coming down heavy-handed and saying this is how you're going to do it, I would say that you create a joint board with different school board members, and that's their job, is to set the expectations for that school or that school superintendent.
How religiously, maybe I shouldn't use that term, but like how precisely do the school districts have to follow those numbers? And what I mean by that is I could say a hypothetical where someone in a rural-ish area has 400 kids, say, in their school district. They had a superintendent. They worked hard to recruit this person. They really like this person. And then this bill passes, governor signs it, and they say, really? Now I have to go add them to somewhere else, or someone else is going to come into my district after I did this. What would you say to them? Are there, how closely do they have to adhere to it? Is 460 kids going to do that? I realize it's probably only going to be a few, but if it's passed, it's a law that people have to live by. So I think you should have to answer for that hypothetical. Yeah.
So we actually looked at, the reason that we arrived at 475 is we looked at how we would do it. And there's a lot of natural, either through sports or geographical reasonings there's a lot of natural collaborations between school districts that would work. So there's certainly a situation like that. The one that I always I thought of initially is if there's somebody that's right about that 475 and they have a big family move or something like that and they drop below that. So there is a waiver process where if they don't quite meet that level, that they can get a waiver from DPI and or submit a waiver to DPI, and they'll review it and for their reasonings, and that way they're not out of compliance, and then it's just reviewed at the end of that school year, so they can either try to jump in with someone else, or if they're expecting per pupil or the pupil number to come up, that's things that's going to get brought up in that assessment.
Last question. What's the timeline for this? A lot of these schools superintendents, it's probably why a lot of the superintendents, and by the way, they're lobbyists. They have their own associate. I was amazed, by the way, by the number of different groups we have representing. We have one for business managers. We have one for superintendents. We have one for principals. We have, in fact, two for principals. We have secondary principals and elementary principals. It was remarkable. But anyway, what's the timeline? If this bill passes, a lot of these, how long do school boards have to deal with this? There's going to be, and by the way, what do they do with existing contracts? With some superintendents, they're going to have to obviously respond to the law.
Yeah. I think that's, I can't say I know everything in the breach of contracts with, or things that negate the contract, but I think this would be I would think that this would be something that would fall into that. I'm trying to, I can't remember what I want to say it's, 2025 is the 2020, the fall of 2025, I think is the time frame. I'd have to go back and double check which one we decided on, and that might with the initial discussions, it sounds like that might get pushed to give them some time. The other argument would be is, depending on how long contracts are for superintendents, I don't know if they're year to year or what, but that by the time, and maybe we have to extend that out to encompass that existing length of contract for a superintendent that's already in place.
Representative Ruby, thanks for your time. Looking forward to the debate.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Well, welcome back. Normally we only have one newsmaker interview, but hey, the legislature's in session. There's a lot more going on. So today we have two, and then Ben and I will talk about some other things after our second interview. But joining us now is Representative Greg Stemen. He's a Republican from the Fargo area, and we're going to talk with him about sports betting, but also, Representative Stemen, you've been in the headlines a little bit. You were appointed by legislative management to sit on what's called the PERS board. PERS is an acronym that stands for Public Employee Retirement System. But this board, it's not just a pension. They also do other things like the health insurance plan. Now, several years ago, the PERS board voted to give that contract after Blue Cross Blue Shield had it for like 37 years. They gave the contract to somebody new. It was Sanford Health, or Sanford Health Plan. And I understand Sanford is gigantic and they have different entities. Those of us on the outside are looking at it. It's just Sanford. So when I say Sanford, just assume I'm talking about the specific portion of it. You also work for Sanford, albeit not for the health insurance side. And one of your colleagues, Republican State Senator Kyle Davison, in a meeting of the Senate Appropriations Committee, had some really tough words for your appointment. Now, he didn't use your name, but he was saying, essentially asking the executive director of PERS, is it appropriate for you to be appointed since you're employed by Sanford? And he was even talking about how he was so angry about it, he had to calm himself down before he remarked. So I guess I wanted to give you an opportunity. I know you spoke extensively to me when I wrote about this, but, wanted to ask you about this here. How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, the initial thing you want to do is you want to say, hey, what other people say about me is none of my business. But you know what? I actually had a good conversation with Kyle, and I just my initial expression was, hey, if you are gonna, bring me up personally, which I brought up by name? No, I wasn't. However, I was the person who was referenced. Could you at least give me a heads up so I could maybe come in and speak to your concerns, rather than kind of having a bunch of other people tell me about it. And Kyle and I had a good conversation, and he made some points that where his concern was derived from, and I respect that. I'm just going to say that I have full support of leadership, and I'm grateful for that. Sanford Health is supportive. They were never contacted. I never talked to them about this. I was called on a Sunday night, offered the opportunity to serve, and I said, yeah, I'd be honored to serve on the board. I think there are important things that board does. So, from my standpoint, I believe my service in the legislature, and previous service maybe on the state board, I'd like to think I've earned the right to be considered an objective individual, not driven by whoever employs me. My interests are for the citizens of North Dakota. In that case, my interests are for the employees of North Dakota, and those things matter to me. I'm for the most part, I'm a lifelong North Dakotan. I lived outside the state for a few years. The opportunity to do this is a really important honor to serve the people of North Dakota, and I take that seriously, and that's what drives me every day. I don't wake up and say, I wonder what my employer would like me to do today. I wake up and say, I wonder, I want to do what's best for the citizens of District 27 and the entire state of North Dakota. That's my motivation, and I believe that my service to this point backs that up.
Representative Stemen, let's set the stage a little bit. The PERS board, as Rob said, essentially administers almost all benefits for public employees. And in order to oversee that massive budget, can you tell me, by the way, really quickly, I don't know, what is the budget of PERS? Do you happen to know off the top of your head? Not a fair question for you, but.
No, I do not
have
massive, it. And I'm not going to risk being.
Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry about that. But it's massive, right?
Yeah.
So therefore there is a board that oversees it. My understanding is that there are 2 legislators appointed by, I believe it's legislative management, to be one of the members of that board, and there are 2 there's 2. It is currently you and Representative Dobrobich, both of Fargo, one Democrat, one Republican, both in the House. Everything you just said was from, I completely believe is sincere on your part, and I don't question it. The perspective I look at when I speak to people who are outside of the legislative world are, if you see either the headline or the individual fact on paper that Sanford as an entity, whether which entity or not, administers, has a contract, and makes a lot of money, and to the tune of millions of dollars from this with public employees, has someone who is working for them on a board overseeing it, and within the perspective of the legislature, I believe it is you and Senator Kristen Roars, work for Sanford out of the 141 legislators. I've had conversations that are equivalent of this all over the place. Couldn't they have just found, they're just doing that to get rich. They're just doing that to line their pockets. Now, I know enough context to know that you literally can't really line your pockets in the position you're in as an overseer. But to the point where you're inviting that conversation and maybe distraction, I would argue, why at the point where you were offered that, wouldn't you simply opt for, and frankly, leadership, opt for one of 139 other options for this? Not to say you're not competent or smart enough to do this. I believe you are, but why not avoid that conversation entirely?
Well, and I think you bring up some points that are worth referencing. I understand what you're saying. Not all of what the PERS board does is deal with the Sanford contract. And if it comes to any where even the possibility of conflict of interest is going to come up, I'm very comfortable recusing myself, because I don't want to put the board or my employer at jeopardy for anybody questioning that. And so not every meeting revolves around, I believe, whoever provides the health insurance at this point in time. And so, and in a state this size, 780,000 people, when you look at 141 members of legislative government, there's bound to be crossover in a lot of different areas. And I think people have to understand that the responsibilities of the duties are the priority for each individual, as opposed to who do those duties impact or affect. And so I respect what you're asking. And I guess I didn't even, when they asked me about it, I guess I appreciated the opportunity, and I guess I didn't consider it a conflict of interest. And the reason I didn't is because I'll recuse myself if anytime we deal with the insurance plan. But at the same time, I didn't even think that it would be a concern when it came to me making a decision regarding, anything on the board, even if it includes the insurance coverage. But if there's a perception of, hey, Sanford's involved in this decision, then I believe it's my duty to say, I'm going to step away so nobody has any concern about this. But there's a lot of other duties that don't involve the fact that I'm employed by a company who a portion or a section of the company actually has the health plan. I think there's a number of other issues that don't impact who I'm employed by at all.
Greg, before I want to move on to sports betting, one last question on this front. I had somebody tell me to say, well, his employment with Sanford is beside the point. The real reason why they put you in is because Senator Dever, who held that position previously, was one of the two lawmakers who held a seat on the board previously, is opposed to the push to get rid of or move away from the defined benefit pension plan, which is obviously part of PERS. That was something that Governor Burgum mentioned during his State of the State address. We want to move away from a defined benefit towards a defined contribution plan. And so they're saying the real reason you were there was to replace Dever, who would have, I guess, was perceived perhaps as an impediment. And I haven't talked to Senator Dever about that, but can you respond to that?
Actually, no, because there was no discussion prior to the phone call I received about being offered the position, saying, hey, would you be willing to serve on the PERS board? I said, yeah. And there was no conversation, no discussion prior to that. When I accepted it, I had no idea what the circumstances were surrounding the fact that there was an opening. And I mean that in all sincerity. And I've actually visited with Senator Dever about this as well. But at the same time, when I was asked by legislative management, I appreciated the opportunity. I appreciated being considered for it. And so that was why I was willing to accept it, because I just considered it an important responsibility.
All right,
to that point, though, you are in the legislature, and I do think it's worth asking. The governor is pushing for a move to defined contribution versus defined benefit. Do you have a stance on that, on the governor's push?
I served on the interim retirement committee, and yes, I was part of introduced in legislation that was introduced at the end of last session. Yes, I'm strongly in favor of going to defined contribution and closing the defined benefit. That's on record, and I voted for that, and I believe it's the fiscally responsible thing to do, both as a member of the board and also as a member of the legislature. The vast majority of North Dakotans don't realize what that unfunded liability is, right at $1.8 billion right now on the state's balance sheet. I was not aware of it until about 3 or 4 weeks into my first session 2 years ago. And I was astounded at what it was at that time, which I believe was $1.4 billion. And so, yes, it's an unsustainable model, on the research that I've done. And I believe that everybody who's enrolled in the defined benefit plan at this point will stay in it. I believe the state's most fiscally responsible decision should be that all new hires after a certain date, whether it's January 1st of 2025, whatever it might be, should all be enrolled in the defined contribution plan. And then the state has to understand that they're going to have to pay out all the people who are currently enrolled in the defined benefit plan. And it's going to be at a substantial cost to the citizens of North Dakota to pay that plan out. And that's going to have to happen no matter what. So yes, I want to make that clear. That's my stance on that has been very, I haven't shied away from that since the end of last session.
All right, let's move on. Sports gaming. We can debate pensions and other. That's a whole other show, debating defined benefit versus. Which, by the way, I agree with you. I think we got to move away from defined benefit plans. But let's move on. Sports betting. Why does it need to be legal in North Dakota?
Well, first of all, I don't do sports betting. I've had a number of constituents and a number of people outside my district talk to me about bringing forth this legislation. Personally, I'm not saying it needs to be legal. What I am advocating for with this resolution is I believe that the citizens of North Dakota, the voting citizens of North Dakota, should be able to have a say, because in order for sports betting to be legal, there needs to be a change to the Constitution. That requires the vote of the people. And all I'm asking for with this resolution is, can we allow the citizens of North Dakota to have a say on just an up or down, yes for sports betting or no for sports betting? And once they make their wishes known, then the legislature can either respond to a positive response in the November 2024 general election, or they realize they don't have to move forward with any legislation. And so, but however, when I speak to the benefits of legalizing it, this is what I'm talking about. It's already happening. The American Gaming Association has extrapolated some data. They know the total dollars that are bet illegally in the United States, and then they extrapolate those out over, the basically per capita basis based on the state's population, things along those lines, based on the number of hits that legal sites will get that phones can't get to because they're in the, so there's a substantial number of North Dakotans already doing this, to the tune of probably in excess of $300 million totally bet, to the tune of about in excess of $30 million being paid to these technically illegal online gambling companies, probably in other countries, Antigua, Latvia, Ecuador, whatever it might be. And what we want to look at is those people that are already doing it. There are no consumer protections for them. Okay. There is no oversight by the state, and there's no, what should I say? Not oversight, but regulation. And so I guess what I'm getting at is the upside is, if these dollars are being bet anyway, why don't we put ourselves in position where we can regulate it, where we can provide oversight, and where we can provide consumer protections, because we're dealing with legitimate legal entities, companies within the United States. And the byproduct of doing it the right way with legitimate legal entities is, yes, we would be able to secure some revenue, probably to the tune of $3.5 million a year to start with. If it grew a little bit, that number would grow. And so I think those things point out that I'm not promoting starting a brand new gambling enterprise. This is happening. The state's receiving nothing from it. More importantly, the people doing it receive no consumer protection.
Representative Stemen, a quick technical question. If this were to pass, it would go to a vote of the people, and then would that impact the state's constitution or simply the state's law?
Thank you for asking. My understanding is, if this resolution passes, that says the people get to vote, and their vote would say, yes, we want to change the Constitution of North Dakota to legalize sports betting, or no, we do not want to change the Constitution of North Dakota to legalize sports betting. Does that answer your question?
It does. The Constitution. So, and then I see Rob has a question, but I have an unfair question and I think a very fair question. But the unfair question is, you spoke to that national organization that knows how much illegal, or how much money is put into illegal betting per year. Do you have any idea how in the world they can actually estimate that in an accurate way? And then I do have a quick follow up to that.
No, I can't speak to it. I mean, the American Gaming Association, and they're willing to put the data out, and I'm guessing it's verifiable at least to a certain margin of error. And so I'm not trying to say. Go ahead.
No, I would say the cynical pushback to that, and I think maybe a healthy skepticism would be, sure, this group that stands to benefit from this says that this is going on, but if they can't prove that, I'm not going to factor that into whether I want this or not. How would you respond to that?
Well, I understand that. I say go ahead and do your own anecdotal testing. Ask 5 or 10 people, do you know anybody that does sports betting?
I do.
Sure.
And I think you'll be amazed at the number of people that say,
absolutely.
Oh, yes. And so go ahead.
Then I do have what I thought was a fair question, which was, you said they take that and divide it out per capita. I would say, and I'd like to hear your response to saying that different activities are at a more increased rate depending on the culture where it's happening. Something that's happening nationally in a heavy concentration in Southern California simply does not happen at the same rate it does in North Dakota, and vice versa. Gun ownership, marijuana use, take your pick of vices or things that are regulated by AFT, basically. Do you think that that's a fair measure for what North Dakota is doing, a simple national average?
I don't know if it's fair. I think what they have to do is they have to extrapolate the data to the best of their ability. And so I'm just saying we can't ignore the fact that it's happening. To what level, to what extent, I don't know, because I'll be honest with you, I don't do it. Will I play a hand of blackjack on occasion or throw $10 into a pull tab? I've done those things. I haven't done the sports betting. I don't even know if I would, but I'm simply talking about the fact that it certainly is happening to a certain level. I just don't want to ignore that. And can we protect the people? Can we provide oversight? And can the state, I guess, maybe generate some revenue? If the numbers are insignificant, I don't think it hurts either way to legalize it, or if the people say they don't want to legalize it, at least it's the end of the conversation. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, I think anytime you're dealing with a black market, and let's be honest, that's pretty much what this is right now. It's hard to estimate, how many people. I think we run into the same problem with drugs. I mean, heck, even untaxed
Especially
cigarettes,
marijuana.
right? I mean, marijuana, cocaine, opioids. I mean, we just don't. You can't ever put a quantity, because it's not like the drug dealers are reporting their transactions to the tax commissioner or something, right? It's just not happening.
Correct.
And the whole point of this would be to move. If we're gonna have, the thing is, I think we know people are doing it. I know people that are doing it. I don't bet on anything. I don't like to gamble, but I know people that are doing it, so we know what's happening. And I think Greg's point is, let's bring it into the daylight. If it's going to happen, let's bring it into the daylight and make sure it's happening the right way, and maybe North Dakota gets some benefit from it. Greg, just one more thing on, I wasn't understanding, because you're saying that the resolution asks North Dakotans whether they want to amend the Constitution. Does that mean a second? Because anytime, for people who don't know, North Dakota's Constitution can't be amended without a vote of the people, whether the legislature initiates the ballot measure or it's initiated by petitioners gathering signatures. There has to be a statewide vote. So would there then need to be, if your resolution passes and the people vote yes, we do want to amend the Constitution to allow gaming, is a second one then required to put the specific language in? Or are you talking about the legislature stepping in and then writing statute around a new constitutional amendment that implements it?
That is correct. What you said at the end is correct, is that the legislature then would be able to put together what they perceive to be the best type of legislation in the 2025 session. And then that would be the answer to the people saying, yes, we want to legalize sports betting. And then the legislature does the best they can and frankly, get all the right people to the table. All the interested parties, all the people that have great insight into this. And part of the reason that I wanted to wait with enabling legislation is, let's be honest, how much does technology change from year to year? In 2 years, what might be available or the manner in which it's delivered might be totally different than it is today. And I just simply wanted to say, can we just allow the people to have a say? Let them vote in November 2024 in the general election. Either yes, they're in favor, or no, they're not. And let's keep it clean. How frustrating is it when we get to these initiated measures or these referred measures, whatever it is, and we have to read through and go, what happens if I vote yes? It's simply vote yes if you're in favor of legalizing, vote no if you're not. Let's not have a ton of amendments. Let's just make it clean. Does the state want sports gambling or not?
Representative Stemen, you have been very clear, and I appreciate that. And I think everyone appreciates every North Dakota voter appreciates the idea that we'd love to have a little bit more clarity and just salience in our ballot measures. I will bring up an aspect that might present itself as a carve out, but I think it is important. It's been brought up by a former education chancellor. Sports betting when it involves student athletes. I personally, just on paper, I don't research it. I'm not an expert in the gambling industry or in student athletics, to be very honest with you, but I don't like it. It doesn't sit well with me, because I would foresee that adding to the pressure and the kind of scrutiny we put on student athletes in a way that I think would be a negative to them and to just student athletic culture in the state. That is not the same when it comes to like NFL. Those players are getting paid millions of dollars. It's a big multi-million-dollar industry with big sponsorships already. You could argue that's what's been happening with collegiate athletes for a long time, but I'd say many would agree with me that we don't want it going in that direction. We want them to kind of be reserved from that and maybe a multi-million-dollar betting industry. Do you have thoughts on that personally? And do you see any kind of carve out or portion of this as it's brought to voters saying student athletics are exempt from this or will remain illegal or supposedly untouchable, even if there might be a black market for it? What are your thoughts?
It's a good question. I'm a former collegiate coach, and I believe this has been going on for a long time, and it became legal in 2018. And I say, and I just say this, there's been few, if any, college betting scandals since 2018 when it became okay for states to legalize college betting. The other thing, or betting on all sports in numerous states. The other thing I look at in the change of college athletics is the NIL, name, image, likeness. It's amazing the amount of money that student athletes are already getting. And so I haven't seen any betting scandals. And the last thing I'll say in relation to that, there will be many, many more safety precautions built in if we're able to use legitimate, legal, United States-based companies to run this through. Their ability to identify problem gambling will happen long before family members recognize it. Their ability to put limits on that or close accounts and not allow people to bet. They will know every list of every roster of every college team in the country, and their ability to stop people from gambling who should not be gambling on college sports is actually will exist in the manner that it doesn't exist in any way, shape, or form right now. So there'll be many, many more safety precautions that will be built into things if this becomes legal. As Rob said, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Transparency and the ability to stop these things before they become issues and before they become problems, I think becomes much stronger. The safeguards that would come with legalizing it to prevent inappropriate gambling or anything along those lines, I think would be light years ahead of where we sit right now for the fact, for the numbers that are happening in North Dakota.
I will say, you were talking about trying to estimate how many people would do this. I have a prediction. If this passes, and I know there's a vote in the House today about it as we're recording this. So by the time you're listening to this, listener, there may have already been a vote in the State House of Representatives. And I'm hoping it passes. I support this legislation. I think it's going to be a lot bigger than anyone says. And I'm kind of looking at ETABs as being the if we get to a point where it's legal to make sports bets in North Dakota, I'm looking at ETABs as the example. We allowed those to go out, and there was a boom in charitable gaming. I wrote about it recently. The growth since over the last 5 years through fiscal year 2022 was like 560%. I think there's going to be a boom in this, and I think it's going to be a lot bigger than we expect. I am glad that it's coming in through the front door. I feel like with electronic pull tabs, it kind of came in through the back door, and now we've got like a almost multi-billion-dollar gaming industry in the state, charitable gaming industry in the state, that we didn't really have an explicit debate about whether we wanted to go there. What I like about this is there is going to be an explicit debate that's very clear, yes or no, on the ballot. Do we want to go down this road? But my prediction is, if this gets legalized in North Dakota, it's going to be big. It's going to be very, very big.
Last question for me, Representative Stemen. Has the governor's office given you any indication of a thumbs up or thumbs down, or not at all?
I think my understanding is they're just observing it and they're going to see where it goes. I mean, I understand. I certainly know they're aware of it. They're paying attention to it. And I think they're just going to see where it goes. And that's one of the things that I'm looking at is this is something that technically is not legal in the state. And so it's not like we're introducing something that would take away from any of the existing options for people in the state. We're simply trying to provide oversight for a number that's happening, regardless of what people think the number is. We know there's a number, and we're just trying to provide some regulation, some oversight, and consumer protection. If, and this is the number one thing to keep in mind, this resolution is simply saying, can we allow the citizens of North Dakota to speak their mind as to whether or not they want to legalize sports betting in North Dakota? I think they will speak in November 2024, and I think they deserve that opportunity.
Representative Stemen, thanks for your time.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
Okay, well, just finished up with our two interviews. Ben and I are going to talk a little bit now. Great interviews, by the way. Always happy when the lawmakers come on. I love the legislative session. I love going through. I love debating this stuff and talking about these ideas. And they're fun to talk about. I mean, even if you don't ultimately support a bill, a lot of times it's healthy just to debate it so that maybe you just even understand your own positions well. Anyway, another debate that's going to be happening, Ben, is the income tax debate. And what's on the table is Governor Burgum wants to put us on a trajectory to get rid of the income tax. What the proposal before this legislative session does is it moves us from a state income tax that has 5 brackets where everybody's paying some, obviously, pre-deductions or whatever, where everybody's paying some, to a new bracket where 60% of North Dakotans, roughly, those making less than, I think it's like $55,000 as a single filer. I think it's less than like $96,000 as a joint filing situation. They would be paying a 0% rate, and then everybody above that would be paying 1.5 points. I like the idea. One thing, Ben, that's been driving me a little bit nuts about it, though, and listen, I understand. I'm not saying that everybody who opposes the bill is wrong. I think there are valid arguments to be made about, does this make us too dependent on oil taxes? Does this leave us prepared to face tough economic times in the future when state revenues may crash again? Are there other ways to use these revenues other than giving them back to the taxpayers? All of those are valid. One thing that I kind of pushed back on today in a column was my good friend Tony Bender, and I like Tony a lot. But he comes out and it's kind of this tax cuts it's tax cuts for the rich. And I'll tell you, Ben, the thing that drives me nuts about that is if you have a progressive income tax code that taxes the people who make more money more at the top, there's no way to cut that without giving, in terms of actual dollars, giving a larger tax cut to people who earn more income. Even if it was a flat rate where everybody paid 1.5%, everybody paid the same exact tax rate, you still couldn't lower that rate for everybody without giving a larger dollar cut to the people at the top because they just make more money. So that debate, it drives me nuts. I don't want, and that's, I guess, maybe what I'm afraid of, and what I want to ask you is, I don't want that debate to be driven by what I perceive as sort of rich versus poor class war.
I mean, every tax debate has to have 1,000 layers on it by their very nature. I think that's a relevant factor here. What I'd like to see Democrats nationally get behind more so than they really have been, at least last 30, 40 years, is something that the more progressive side of the aisle, that I would like to see a progressive on the income tax side structure, and the more libertarian elements who are, public policy watchers would like to see is go in and make it easier as a working class, middle class person to file your taxes, maybe eliminate the burden from you if you're making under a certain amount, because the whole aspiration is to move from working class to middle class to upper middle class, and get rid of, actually start tearing out, instead of just paying, verbal homage to it, actually get rid of the endless amount of carve-outs that are there for people who can hire high-end accountants to make sure they don't really pay them. Now, I think it's a very fair thing to ask when it comes to the governor's proposal, which, like you said, is 0 for the 60% and under of income earners, 1.5 for the upper tier. I think it's very, in fact, it's almost necessary to debate and bring up how much are the folks on each end of that scale saving versus each other, and who gets the most, and then what is the motivation behind.
Why is that valid, though? I mean, because there's no universe based on mathematics. There's no universe in which the people paying at the top of the bracket, who are making the most money and paying the rate, are gonna not get a lesser income or lesser cut than the people at the bottom.
I don't. So using incredibly watered down math, we're just going to say the top income that anybody earns is $1,000 in Ben's magical hypothetical. The richest person on the block earns $1,000, and then a working class person is earning $350 that year. Under the governor's plan, previously that person who was making $350 maybe paid $14 into the state. The person making $1,000 was paying $200 into the state, say. Now, under this new plan, the person under making $1,000, and my numbers are extremely loose here, but it's the philosophy I'm getting at. The person paying $1,000 is now saving $150 that they would have been paying to the state, and now instead of taking it from them, they're keeping it. And you can argue that's something we should strive for. And the person making $350 is only saving $14. The argument would be, you're only saving that person on the lower end so much, versus the one on the top end is saving quite a bit more with that, and therefore they're getting most of the benefit. Now,
Right.
the pushback to that I know is you're still taking in each of these scenarios, and I understand that, but where's the need there? Because the governor is saying that we need to have this. The motivation is a workforce development issue. I'd really like to see the numbers and stats as to who and how someone in certain sector that we need, or someone looking to move to the state, because it seems to be to fill in these jobs. So we seem to have these 40,000 jobs we just can't fill in, right? In the state of North Dakota, it's almost becoming an eternal problem. Is there someone sitting going, well, I was going to move to North Dakota or Florida. I just don't know which one I'm going to move to. Oh, North Dakota also eliminated income tax from my bracket. I guess I'll move to North Dakota. That's too simple, but the motivation needs to be proved out, needs to have some kind of a stab behind it.
I mean, it's complicated. I mean, you could look at like Texas versus you can look at like Texas versus California. Texas has no income tax at all. California has a pretty high income tax.
It does.
So, I mean, you hear about it. I mean, it does happen. And I think the problem is people are like, well, because it's not the magic bullet that's going to bring everybody we need to North Dakota to fill these jobs, therefore it's irrelevant. Listen, there's a lot of things I think we can do and we should do to make North Dakota a more attractive place to work and to live. We can't do anything about the weather. But there's other things we can do. Income tax is one of them. But let's go back to your example where, I don't think it's relevant that the people at the top, of course, they're paying the most tax. If you cut the tax, they're going to get the most dollars back. So let's put it in another context. Let's say we're debating whether or not to exempt clothing from the sales tax, right? And I could argue, we can't do that because rich people spend more money on clothing. Therefore, they're going to benefit from this more than poor people. Or let's talk about property taxes. Let's do a reduction in the mills for property taxes. We say, we can't do that because rich people own bigger, more elaborate, more expensive homes. Therefore, they're going to benefit from it more than someone who owns a more modest home because they're lower on the income tax scale. I mean, to me, that reasoning is illegitimate. Of course, people who earn more money when you cut taxes are gonna get a larger dollar amount that they get to keep than people who pay fewer taxes by dint of they have a lower income or what have you. That's just reality.
And the dollar amount is almost certainly the case because they're earning more money, like you said. But two factors there. One, we are talking more about percentages of what they're going to get cut under the governor's plan. I feel like the percentage on the top income earners is going to be a far bigger cut because we say 1.5, but that's not truly the percentage getting cut. If you're at 3.75 is the highest North Dakota goes, or 3.2, I mean you got to be earning serious cash to get in that top bracket.
The top bracket is 440. I think it's $445,000 a year.
I mean, you got to be, I'm sorry, there's just not that many, no offense, because there are people who are earning that, but there's just not that many people earning that in the state. I'll embarrassingly admit I fell just short of that last year. I'm hoping to get up there. But with income tax, it's exactly what you're saying. It's what you're earning versus property sales, whatever. Those are in the case of sales tax, consumption tax, but in the case of property tax, it could, in many cases, is you're just sitting there tax. You're sitting in your property. You're not earning anything from it. It doesn't give you any money. In fact, if you own a house, you know darn well some plumbing repair, your window, your roof, something happens to your floor. It's actually probably taking money out of your pocket to keep it up if you're doing it right as a responsible homeowner. Then you're getting taxed on top of that. So there's a major difference there in how it's.
But then I think there's an additional problem of talking about, because that is kind of the debate that's being set up. Is there's an alternative plan that a group of lawmakers have come up with. They want to do another property tax buy down. They want to use legacy fund revenues to buy down local taxes. And so we get into this either or, right? Because everybody says that. Well, nobody cares about the income tax. We need to do property tax relief. When has the legislature ever meaningfully reduced people's property taxes? And because every session that I have written about, Ben, for 20 years, we have had some sort of a property tax reduction plan. And what are people still incensed about? Their property taxes.
Their valuation of their property taxes.
So convince me that the legislature could do something meaningful.
I don't necessarily know. Well, I think they maybe could, but it's not the way they've been doing it. And it takes a long-term vision. Also, if you really want to get into it, I think it takes a new formatting in the way we do the legislature. I think actually the every other year thing creates a discontinuity that makes it so that we never follow through on long-term plans like that. It's what I call long-term NASA infrastructure budgeting, which is NASA will have 20, 30, 40-year plans, and then every 4 or 8 years, their whole plans get scrapped. So everything they do to build a, lunar base gets scrapped. They have to start all over again. So you never get anything done. And that's an oversimplification, but you understand what I'm driving.
Yeah.
At.
Well,
in
the here and now, we have a state that has billions in surpluses and funds and everything. And a lot of these funds, by the way, are becoming revenue sources in and of themselves. I mean, I think the legacy fund kicks off about as much in interest as we collect in corporate income tax. I'd have to look at the latest figures to say
that'd be good to know. Actually,
don't quote me on that, but it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars.
And not to tell you assign you work, but you should look that up because that's actually a good thing to see if we collect as much income tax.
Because I do think we need to change how we think of the legacy fund. It is not.
Oh yeah, we do.
It is not. It has become a sort like not even just spending the principal of the legacy fund. It's the interest that it accrues, the earnings that it accrues have become a revenue source in and of itself that I believe we could use to offset some of the tax burdens that North Dakotans are carrying.
Absolutely.
And so I believe
we're
that
subsidizing bonds some of the infrastructure projects we need to do in building.
And if we're gonna do it, I am not convinced that this legislature is capable of implementing a meaningful property tax reform that's going to make a difference. So what's left on the table? I don't want to do anything with the sales tax. What's left? The income tax.
I hear you. I got one last point. I got a high horse saddled up for myself.
I get so excited about this. I hope I get so excited. I'm not yelling at Ben. I just get very passionate about it.
No, as we should. I have a high horse to jump on as my last point, which is today in finance and tax. Former legislator Betty Grandy came in to testify in favor of it, and she brought in Grover Norquist, the national tax figure. I don't know. Had you heard about that?
I did. Yeah, I like Grover. Be nice to Grover.
I assume that you're a big fan. I thought the testimony was rambly and somewhat embarrassing. There are several quotes I could pull out that are not. But what I want to know is, who's paying for him? I don't know if the committee got to ask him this. Who's paying for him to come in and do this? And is the governor aligning himself with Grover Norquist or enlisting folks like Betty Grandy to come in and support this? Is a question well worth asking, because I'm not making this up. This is what happened in the committee.
As someone who has worked in that world in the past, I'm assuming that Grover's group, Americans for Tax Reform, probably paid. They travel all over the country. I mean, their tax cuts are their thing. They travel to lots of states, to bring that down. Now, as a political strategy, I don't know that bringing in, a national figure helps a lot of times, especially one that might be polarizing like a Grover Norquist, or even frankly at a local level polarizing like a Betty Grandy. I don't know if you're making the case for income taxes. Frankly, I think the governor himself is a much better spokesperson for that than
I'd concur with that sentiment and add to it, as someone who's a grouchy old man before his time, and listeners can't see that I'm wearing a tweed jacket now. Get off my lawn.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna on that nerdy note, we're gonna wrap it up. Ben, thank you so much for your time as always, coming on. Later in the week, I'm trying to get Congressman Armstrong on. As you can imagine, things have been a little raucous in the U.S. House of Representatives, but I wanted to get him on for an update. So that may be happening later this week. Ben, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Rob.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.